Welcome to the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowden, where we unpack the strategies and solutions that make localization fast, scalable, and efficient. I'm your host, Stefan Huyghe. Hey, everybody, here we are, the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowden. And this morning, we're with my very good friend, Boryana Nenova, who is talking to us from the Czech Republic, I think.
Yes, correct.
All right. So it's a Texas, Czech Republic link up this morning or this afternoon for her. And we're going to be talking about the importance of shifting localization tools from translator-centric to buyer-centric, or at the very least to be appropriate for both. And Crowden has paid a lot of attention to that. So we thought it would be a good topic to discuss with Boryana. And before I just dive right in, because I have a tendency of doing that, I should be kind to her and let her introduce herself real quick before we start with the first question. Go ahead, Boryana. Tell us who you are and why we're talking to you this morning.
Well, hi, Stefan. Thank you so much for having me, and thank Crowden for the invite. My name is Boryana. I'm Bulgarian, but based in the Czech Republic, Brno. Why are you talking to me? It's because I've been in the localization industry for what feels forever, but it's actually 2 decades now. I started as a translator, then grew into project management, program management, have managed localization processes both on buyer and vendor side. And as I've been a translator myself, I think I can provide some insights on the topic.
Awesome. I'm just doing the math in my head, 2 decades, somehow that doesn't work out. So you started working in localization at 12 or 15?
It was back in 2003. I was fresh out of high school. I had just gotten my first, degree in English language. And then eventually I got involved into the localization of software products. Back then, desktop-based, we only had Excel. As the prominent tool. And then in the next few years, I first got tools for the first time. I got introduced to the whole notion of translation memories, matching, etc., how to handle a project. So it all happened from scratch, let's say, for me.
I always prepare topics for my guests and let them choose one. And I can see why you picked this one, because you're indeed the ideal candidate to come talk about CAT tools and translation memory systems from both ends of the house, so to speak, because you fulfilled both roles. Let's go to our first topic. The first question that came to mind here was, what do you think are the most important features modern localization tools should have from the perspective of buyers? What's super important for you as a buyer?
Luckily, that's one of the most recent type of projects that I was involved in. So from buyer's perspective, I say the number one criteria for me nowadays would be connectivity in terms of which integrations are supported, what of the existing tools that I have can be directly connected without extra noise, fuss, or development. The level of integration, of course, is very important. So the first thing I would look at is available integrations and how many of my existing systems and workflows I can plug in directly with as little as possible additional effort. I want to say without any, but there's not really such a scenario. So yeah, connectivity and integrations is my top one.
What are some of the applications that you've integrated with TMS as of late? Just so we can get an idea what type of integration you yourself have been looking for.
In the last project that I worked, I was involved with marketing localization. So there was email builders, Google Drive, other content management system, but it was a proprietary one, so that's a different case. I mentioned the email builders. We had to connect Figma, for example, for the visuals. But in the past, I've also worked with Git-based systems, other CMS systems like website builders, let's say more not proprietary, but out-of-the-box ones. So yeah, these are the most recent ones. And others, I'm probably missing something here. But yeah, quite a wide variety of tooling.
From a translator point of view, if you put that hat on for a second, what do you think from the traditional translator perspective? What's the most important set of features there, you think, for the translation tool, localization tool to have?
Well, linguists look at texts differently. For example, from buyer side, texts are important as much as they have to roll out as fast as possible to the targeted markets. On the other hand, linguists want to do their best work because that's their job. So the tools they must have are oriented more towards quality and text handling rather than, let's say, tags and other classic web or cloud features, to put it that way, like Git systems, for example. So the major difference is the perspective from which text is treated. Linguists want to handle the texts, while content producers or buyers want to have the text ready. So for the buyer side, the speed and the turnaround time are much more important. Then linguists, on the other hand, actually enhance the quality that they're producing. So there should be a balance between the two, I want to say.
And there's also maybe a movement nowadays to get more developer first tools in our operations, so to speak. You are quite a technical person. I know this from my prior interactions with you. So I think you're probably interested in tools that give you flexibility from a developer point of view. You compared that type of requirements with what we've already talked about. We've talked about the buyer-centric features and the translator features that are important. What features are you really looking for as developer in localization?
I don't code myself, so I'm not really a developer. But in order to facilitate the work of developers, and let's be honest, it's not only developers nowadays, it's also designers, for example, because Figma is a tool, it's very code-oriented, to put it that way. So what I want is easy interface, easy communication between the tools, easy transfer of text, and not only easy transfer, but transferring the text in the proper segmentation with the proper rules, parsing, etc., so that something that may appear broken, let's give an example. There's for example, line break in the middle of a segment. The linguist needs to have this in one segment, not in two. And of course, the key matching, how developed the integration is, how well the systems communicate with each other. Are there any available add-ons for additional parsing features? Is there an option to add personalized rules? For example, Crowding has really extensive library of add-ons and ways to manage exactly that. And then the backwards communication, how you return those texts in a multiplied now version, having to support different scripts, characters, etc. So this is what a tool is supporting: the process, the export of text and the import of the multiplied version. Multiplied in languages, I mean, whether it's 2, 6, or 60.
Yeah, I think you sold yourself short there a little bit, because in just a couple of minutes, we realize that you're deeply involved in the technical aspect of the implementation. And I can see how the technicality of things would be super important for you. What trade-offs do developer first tools make compared to traditional translation memory systems, you think, and what's the best balance for you in that regard?
On your first note and how I become so technical, as I mentioned earlier, I started translating when we had to do everything manually. At the time, we weren't using translation memories, nor glossaries, nor automated checks. So we had to actually create macros as scripts and personalized glossaries and CSV files, etc. And then I kind of grew with the CAT tools that I was using from desktop, then later on to cloud, from, let's say, language-oriented to code-oriented. I don't fully agree with this separation. So I would also like to make the separation here, like all tools were buyer-oriented at some point. Like we cannot compare, let's say, the average customer of 2007 with the average customer nowadays. The tooling that we're using now is completely different. Everything is moved to the cloud. And this is where the big difference comes, because the non-traditional or the code-oriented tools actually appeared more than a decade later. Let's say the high rise is the last 10 years. They started appearing, now multiplying. So in the last 10 years, we saw the massive shift towards the cloud, towards version management systems like Git, etc. Figma showed up with a bigger persistence, let's say, in that period of time. So the trade-off is that these systems are developed for different use case. And they think developer first. In many cases, the people who are actually involved in the creation of these tools are developers who had to struggle with localization. So they don't necessarily have the linguistic perspective and the language person who is also spending a lot of time in the same environment. So not necessarily a trade-off, but it's a different perspective that everybody has to get used to. And if the traditional tools were not that accommodating to developers and code people, then modern tools are missing the other perspective. Not all, of course. Some have very advanced environments and tooling for that. So, yeah, it's a different perspective. It's basically a different perspective, not necessarily a trade-off.
I think localization has gotten so much more agile and continuous, to pun towards the title of our podcast here quite intentionally. When I started, I want to tell you this anecdote because you just reminded me of something with your macro comment. When I started in localization, I was working at a company called eTranslate. They were doing complex website localization projects with spreadsheets, and the project managers on one side of the floor would have to wait until somebody closed the Excel spreadsheet on the other side of the floor to be able to go check on their projects. And I actually walked into my boss's office within the first couple of weeks of working there and said, "Hey, I have a background in database development. Could I maybe make something over the weekend that could help us with this, rather than to having to wait on the spreadsheets being closed?" So that was the same era, probably earlier than you still, that I was doing my activities there.
I remember, let's say, Dropbox as the first system.
And the files took forever to load.
Yeah, but in an oversimplified comparison, let's say Dropbox is a version of Git, because you do have the version management. People don't really bring it down to these blocks of version management, online syncing, etc. So, yeah, I think this is the biggest difference between the traditional tools, which were developed much earlier. They were solving problems for different type of customers, for customers who had different type of texts and different types of documents. Not everything was going online back then. A lot of printing materials, let's say, and our favorite format, PDF.
Yeah, it was file oriented, right? It was very transactional. And right now, a lot of companies really don't work like that anymore. They have continuous needs. And one of the things that do come to mind is, how do you think that translators can be best kept satisfied while at the same time accommodating some of these needs that we have on the buyer's side? Where do you see some gaps? Are there things that you think tools could improve with from a translator perspective? And what are some of the key features you think that tools should have nowadays that could make translators more productive?
Well, that's quite a complex question. And if we ask 5 linguists, I'm sure we will get 5 different responses. But let's name a few, like not necessarily in priority order. For example, something that I missed a lot as a linguist was in the last project that I actually was a linguist. I really missed proper QA. I wanted to verify what I've delivered. So QA is one of the first things that linguists complain about or want to have more advanced features. Now, you go to write an email and there's Grammarly or some other AI tool on top of it, or your email provider can offer some sort of editing. So when you deliver a translation, there are more complex checks nowadays that you want to do. You want to verify if all the tags are there. You want to check, let's say, if you missed some number, etc., etc. So LQA is basically the modern spell check. Another thing that I really appreciated in tools, purely from linguistic perspective, was glossary management, capabilities of searching in translation memories, the user interface, which was also very accommodating for quickly finding relevant results. Let's say, how can modern tools get closer to linguists? Well, I guess listen to feedback, onboard a few linguists.
That's why we have you here right now, so you can tell us all the gripes you have. In an ideal world, what kind of tool features would you have to leverage?
I want everything in one screen with keyboard shortcuts. I want to work as fast as possible and as uninterruptedly as possible. This is, let's say, the goal. I want to have as many resources available in one screen, be it the context. Let's say you're working on a web page. I would like to see the preview. HTML supports that quite easily, let's say. So I want to have as much as possible in one screen, and I want to be able to QA it for manual errors, etc., which are quite common. Of course, if there is machine translation, I want the best one. I want it trained. I want it backed with machine learning. I want it improving. And I'm actually very happy to say that I've worked on such projects. And it was years ago, not recently. It was actually before AI, where we were still training machine translation engines. I've had 100% matches that I was staring at, trying to find a mistake, and I couldn't. So when buyers implement tools, sometimes they omit to ask, hey, is this the best option for your language, for your market, or for whatever other metric is important to the specific buyer? And another gap that I've seen in many of the projects I work, no one really invests into training the linguists how to use the systems. And whenever I've been in the project management or program management role, I've always been asked questions that seem obvious to me, but people never actually been trained on it. The feature is there. They just don't know about it. And that, of course, includes me. Like, I don't know all the features that are available in all the tools, but go there, click the buttons, go through the documentation, ask around, and more often than not, that there's already a solution. So training is a gap, I would like to point out.
I've always thought with traditional translation management systems, I've always thought it would be handy because a lot of these projects have large teams working on them and translators that work in conjunction. It would be a good idea to connect everybody in kind of like an instant messaging way where you can ask feedback directly and the other translators are involved with it as well. They can see what kind of questions you ask.
It is a very important feature, and I agree it should be there. But to be honest, I don't think I ever actually made full use of it. As long as, for example, I was working in a multi-language project, the languages were above 30. There it was very useful so that when one linguist asks a question, everybody sees it. So, it was more like adding a label to a specific segment or tag or file or etc. Like you have some tag with unknown content and somebody's asking what are the options here so that we can adapt the genders or whatever other specific target language has. That was very useful. Otherwise, I don't, or at least I haven't worked in projects where the chat was that extensively used.
What about, you mentioned the word AI. It took us 15 minutes to get to the word AI, so we did quite well, actually. A lot of the conversations take much less than that. But since you brush upon AI, I have a question about that. And again, measuring it from both the translator and the buyer side, what do you think are the best AI integrations that you're not seeing, or the best AI integrations that you are seeing as well? I'd like to know all of them on both the buyer and the translator side. And do they conflict? What are your feelings about that? That's about 7 questions right there. We're going to talk for another 10 minutes about this right now, but go ahead. Whichever one you want to pick off.
What I'm not seeing, that's easy. When the big boom of AI happened, we were having constant chats back then, and we were imagining this future where we will have heat maps at our fingertips. We will be looking at market metrics and implementing them directly to localization. And something like 2 years later, we realized that that's still far in the future. So this is also what happens to an extent with AI, because now we can see it in pretty much any tool that we're using. All the cloud tools based, some better than others. And for languages, we read about new technologies, new implementations, new solutions almost on a daily basis. But I do test them as a linguist myself and project manager as well. I've tested through the course of the last 2 years. We reached the stage where the increments of improvement are no longer that significant. I feel like we reached something like, depending on the language, let's say, readable quality of 80, 85, let's say. I don't want to sign off on these numbers. But then the increments that actually improve, the improvements that are happening with all these new technologies, they're not as immense because the language database, it's not endless. And what I also see is that at the start, we had amazingly good results for a number of the big languages. We still see that. There are improvements for smaller languages, but they're still far from the quality that I would want to see them at. Let's say, for example, Spanish and French return so much better results than other languages, which are also languages spoken by many people. And another thing I want to point out, maybe as an answer to an earlier question, that's another gap. The buyer more or less has the expectation that AI will do the job. But then the linguists face a different situation. And there's another loophole that I faced myself and I'm facing currently. We entered, we were talking about continuous localization. I feel like I'm currently in a continuous optimization loop because there's something new going out. There's new tool, there's new feature, there's new add-on, there's something new. And if 10 years ago we could create a process that could live for 5 years, right now the loop is much shorter. So how long is the shelf life of all these things? And how often do you want to actually upgrade is another question. And once you have a process set up in place, how many dependencies did you create in the meantime? So that's something that I believe is challenging quite a lot of people right now because the number of systems and tools and integrations and connections is just increasing.
I think that's some of the hesitation that I see too with larger companies implementing new tools is that they have been in a particular direction for a number of years, and providing a new tool might upset that workflow, and it might be very difficult to undo the spaghetti bowl that was already installed over the last 20 years, so to speak. So it's almost as important to provide an easy way to integrate with current systems, I think, than it is to provide ways to hook it up with connections like we were talking before. Would you agree with that?
You're right. Migration is painful. Usually comes with a lot of disruption and a lot of not workarounds, but a lot of workflows that need to be changed, documented, etc., and some things that have been forgotten in the many years. But I'm talking about existing processes and scalability. For example, you start a company, let's say some SaaS platform, and you set up your process, what you did, let's say in 2018. Now, 6 years later, all the tools that you connected back then have improved, upgraded. There are new rules, there are new text formatting within these tools. You, as a buyer, have also improved your own tool. So there's added layers of tooling on all ends. Let's say the TMS, the tool, the CMS that you're using, and also your own tool or your own platform. So the integrations need to be taken care of. Another very important aspect is security. Let's not forget security, because demand for Improved security is also increasing significantly. And what you created 5, 6 years ago maybe does not even meet these requirements. That also leads to the need to actually go for higher contracts and higher plans in order to meet security requirements, of course, depending on the type and size of organization. But that's something that should not be neglected. So when I say continuous loop of optimization, this is what I mean. You have to be very alert for potential changes. Let's say you add a new tool on your CMS. It's a proprietary CMS, and you add some new tool or some new editing panel or whatever, and then you have to actually consider it in the integration because it's a custom-made integration. So all these dependencies, they kind of cascade into creating more work. And we tend to forget focus that actually it all started because of language.
Any features that you think of all the time that nobody is providing that you wish you had at your fingertips? What is something that you really wish you had that nobody is doing right now and you think, man, if I had that, it would just be perfect?
Okay, I won't bet that no one is doing that because I haven't seen it in a while. But if you remember let's say 10 years back, we would have the project management system where we would manage vendors, finances, etc. And then we would have the translation management system. What I really miss is a translation management system that has the capabilities of project management. That's one of the things I miss. For example, when I worked with a dedicated team, one of the things that I always forgot was holidays, time off. Like, I don't have it at the top of my tips. Like, I have to look through some calendars. I have to remember who is located in what country at that time, So I would be very happy if these people could just put their calendars. And when my automatic workflow assigns them a job, it sends me a flag that this linguist is not available, and it goes to the second option. I don't want to send emails. I want to have the translation management platform that allows me to never send an email in my life, if possible. I want to work in a single environment as well. Analytics. There are very advanced analytics. I'm not saying they're not. And Crowdin is doing amazing work in that direction as well. I had a sneak peek a few days ago. So analytics in the sense of how do I actually bring ROI? I have to take this information, then put it somewhere else, because nowadays project localization managers, we need to know about people, we need to know about markets, we need to know about tools, we need to know about our own product. We need to also manage budgets and have finance at our fingertips. And then we also need to be able to handle data and make data-driven decisions. So again, I'm really dreaming of a TMS that can encompass all these kind of small details that make me send extra emails into one place. In the last project that I was involved, one of the goals that I set was actually to have self-service localization. Right now, it's actually very easy to achieve that, either using machine translation headlessly, like in the interfaces where you need it. For example, in multi-international companies, that is a very handy tool to put. What I mean by self-service, there are so many processes, there are so many people and stakeholders. Traditionally, localization is one of the most multi-stakeholder departments. So my goal was to actually provide an environment in which everyone was able to either see when something will happen or to have this workflow where they actually just press a button and it just goes assigned wherever it's needed, whether it's a template, a web page, or whatever.
I knew this was going to happen. When we start geeking out, this is not the first time you and I have geeked out, by the way. Most of our sessions have not been recorded. So I am so happy that we actually got to do it on camera this time. But we had no trouble filling a half an hour with technical stuff. And it was wonderful, wonderful hearing from you and getting some insights on what buyers and translators would like to see in localization tools. And I'm sure that the good people that are responsible for these technical implementations here at Crowden are going to be super happy with the feedback that you've provided this morning here for me, this afternoon for you in the Czech Republic. Thank you so very much for being here with us and sharing your insights. And we could probably do a second one, so we'll have to have you back on one of these days in the future. Thank you so very much, Boryana. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, folks, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowden. We hope you found it as insightful as we did. If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to learn more about how leading companies are managing their multilingual content efficiently, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Thank you for tuning in. For more resources on how to streamline your localization process, visit crowden.com. See you next time.